and you'll be putting it on Facebook. Yeah. Thanks.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to PWSI Season 3, Session 1. It's a great privilege to be back. We did take a 3-month break, but it's lovely to be back again. Indran is my co-host and Dawn is my co-host as well in a different capacity. And thank you all for joining us. Jess, Tim, Joanna, and Susana. And we will start with Susana. And I have Susana's bio on the chat box already, but I will. Indran, do you want to introduce her?
Sure. Yes. I mean, thank you, Sudeep, and it's wonderful to be back doing this PWSI series. Susana Case is a brilliant poet and a brilliant architect when she produces her books. I mean, each book is not only each individual poem, but a story, a very compelling story, a narrative, as well as a sort of a lyric expression. And The Damage Done is a major work, and I'm very proud to be able to introduce her to this audience, which I know will grow as people watch the program after the recording is done. The Damage Done is a book that is already getting a lot of attention. I'll let Susana go into the details and reading a selection from the book. Susana is also, besides her own writing in English, a translator from Italian, and her own work has been translated into Spanish and Italian and Polish. One of her books has been published in Poland, and I'm being quite informal because I'm just speaking from the heart and from the head. My friend and my confidant in many ways. When poets form communities informally, and so this is a principal member of the community for me. Welcome, Susana Case. Go ahead.
Thank you, Indran.
Welcome, Susana.
Thank you. Thank you, Sudeep. Thank you, Don, for being the tech wizard for so many programs, including this one. So I'm reading from my new book here, The Damage Done, and from Broadstone Books. And this book is a departure for me because it's very narrative, and all 43 parts of the book, in a sense, form one long poem. It's set in the late 60s, early 70s, and has recurrent characters throughout. And the overall theme is FBI malfeasance during the COINTELPRO program in the United States. This was a program started by J. Edgar Hoover, which was designed to harass and destroy progressive groups and those that supported progressive causes. And when I began to do work on this, it was because I saw echoes between the past and the present, although the situations are different. In The Damage Done, the protagonist is a woman named Janie, who is a model with an eating disorder and a contributor to such causes, and therefore a target. And she is found dead at the beginning, and her story is told in flashbacks. So I'm going to start around the middle of the sequence and read from there. And this is flashback. I just want to make love to you. Because Janie's would-be lover thinks the husband is inattentive, because he wants to tell her whatever she needs to hear, because she's shown up with her checkbook and the organization has unpaid bills, because she's played the seduction game before, just has to ignore her disgust toward her body, because Isaac Hayes is good background music for getting it on, because she likes the untethered anonymity, thinks this man undressing her with his mind doesn't have a clue about her life, has too much swagger, because in fact, he's odd, knows damn well she's semi-famous, because they both know if you're drinking black coffee, first kisses taste bitter. Because of the weed, he notices the sunset. Its cottony mauve red matches the embroidery on her jeans. So after she's found dead in a car, in the narrative in this book, the FBI tries to pin it on her lover, who is a kind of hanger-on of the Black Panthers. And this is Everyone Wants Answers. He has his friend take a few Polaroids, wants to walk out of the police station looking the same way he looked going in. The one with bad teeth is too nice, surely just a ruse, and will damage him the worst, then go to a bar and fill up with booze. Would he like a soda? His throat is dry. He won't give them the satisfaction of needing anything. Let's go over it again, fill in a few holes. He doesn't know a thing. They read him his rights. He's not sure what to say. A freebie legal aid hack won't do him any good. His sadness makes it hard to move. He's losing his fight. Mrs. Janie, this really isn't him anymore. He's barely listening. Political stuff, he hears a cop snarl, tries for bravado. Hey, when you're a Black man, just walking down the street is political stuff. His words fall flat. He isn't cooperative enough, the fat one says, for them to help. Let's go over it again. The fat crosses his arms. One of the COINTELPRO techniques was illegal surveillance and bugging, which is referenced in this next part, ears everywhere. Someone else's nightmare is a stray dog that wanders in and becomes your nightmare. The number of bugging devices in the house, the office, the bar, everywhere. Bugs at Panther headquarters pick up a woman in a sports car. Hey, I love you. Pick up me too, as she drives away. Illegal surveillance tapes go missing the way sins are washed off in the river or inconvenient facts. On a hunch, the detective finds a transmitter in his own kitchen phone, the wall phone with a long cord that could stretch into the dining alcove, another in the phone on the bedroom nightstand. When were the feds in the house? Two bugs laid out on the coffee table, the detective staring. He decides to put them back, knows they're there, which evens the score. What this is, he tells his wife, stroking her hair for once, is a lot of trouble. There are a number of epistolary sections in this book, most of them signed by me, although there is one in Janie's voice. And this next is both epistolary in the form of a letter, and it's a flashback, since her life, as I said before, is told in flashback. Flashback, dear Janie, you wait for the lighting to be set up. It's quiet except for the seagulls, the crew, you chattering. It's so much colder when your bare feet touch the sand on the Santa Barbara beach. The landscape in the distance is visible, unlike the mountain hollows you know so well. Nothing can hide, not a black sedan, a man motionless and persistently watching on an ocean road where everyone else is on the move. You gyrate at the water's edge in a striped Kenzo dress, could be selling anything. Put on your professional smile that says, this is fun. You wish you were having fun somewhere else, Paris, or a place where you could avoid getting wet, a club with a good blues band. That night, you take some pills and fall asleep, dream of someone falling off a mountain, wake up screaming, and the man sits outside your hotel in a shiny sedan, both of you sleepless, waiting. Old stories. The detective has had a Gillette-coated stainless steel razor for years. He too is becoming an old story. The slight blue tinge and the white tile of the bathroom makes him look ill, a reddish yellow cast in the whites of his eyes. Age encircles the periphery like a feral dog or a federal cop looking for weak spots. He has awakened to a horror movie, like watching the March of the Undead. Lately, he awakens this way every day he's on the job. Today, it's some revolutionary task force sprinkling the city with bombs that plays with his head. He barely has time to think about the little electronic tracker. It meets government standard, discovered under Janie's Carmen Gia. He has suspicions, but there are no fingerprints. So Janie has as I said before, an eating disorder, and also has a drug problem, which is referred to in this part. Another one of the flashbacks about her life, flashback clinic. Getting off the Valium, not so bad. Janie thought a few sleepless nights, weak and fuzzy, sweat, some vomiting. She could keep the speed. Can't find the old vials though. Where are they? She might feed solely on love and destruction, a sense of danger. Her pulse feels erratic, as if there's no truth in the beating of her heart. At the clinic appointment her husband forces her to keep, he points out that her dress is the color of bruises. A terrier dog with a chewed slipper. He won't let go of the idea she's ill. She makes a run for it, pushes open the heavy grayish green doors, quickens her pace past the still life paintings, dozens of vases of flowers. She pants, can't take in enough air, can't stand doctors poking through her business like deranged plumbers. Her husband is right behind, eyes crinkled in fake concern. She knows he would tie her to a cliff face just to try to appease his gods. Dear disorder. Water unravels ugly like a cheap nylon rope. At first, the feds thought the snitch would be assassinated with the others after spiking the Kool-Aid and aiding that lethal raid. Then they decided to try to keep their investment intact, create a patsy, focus on bad jacketing, discredit the dead woman's lover. All that was needed was a little cooperation with the change in plans. The feds expected the local cops to fall in line, didn't anticipate any detective would resist. Dear disorder, do you remember when the rumor spread Stokely Carmichael was CIA with a fake document left in a car, a little whisper here and there? That was a piece of cake. The feds wanted to stop the social justice cash flow, and now that Janie's died, they feel at least her money stream has dried. So I've got one more poem to read, but first I want to thank you all again. And this poem, COINTEL Portrait with Blasts, refers to an explosion that some of you might remember, March 6, 1970, particularly if you lived in New York, at 18 West 11th Street downtown. Members of the Weather Underground were making the nail bomb that is described in the poem, and additional bombs were being built for the library at Columbia University. So 3 people were killed in the house while making the bombs, and there were some other people in the house as well who fled. And after the bombing, James Merrill wrote a poem about the house, which I'm sure you know, 18 West 11th Street, which happened by coincidence to be the house in which he partially grew up. So this is COINTELPRO portrait with blasts. Another young woman, former teacher, hates being rich. The revolution is here. She puts her dividends from the family corporation into the collective's common fund. The Black Panthers laugh at them, summertime soldiers. Townhouse basement on West 11th Street, house where the poet James Merrill was a toddler, house of the parents on vacation in St. Kitts of one of the other bombers. The bomb goes off too soon, meant for that evening, an army-based dance for non-commissioned officers and their dates at Fort Dix. They find pieces of bodies shot through with roofing nails, the nails shrapnel to increase the radius of destruction. Air of ash, wood, glass, hail of grit, and cracked plaster. In the basement, 4 12-inch lead pipes packed with dynamite from the New England Explosives Corporation, blasting caps, and cheap alarm clocks. 2 50-pound cases of dynamite, enough to destroy every townhouse on the block. A detached fingertip matches that of the former teacher on file for days of rage. 2 male would-be bombers dead too, 1 crushed. All this will fail to end the war. About the obliteration, it was nothing egocentric, her mother tells the press. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Susana. You know, I was busily transferring your poems into the chat, but I was able to listen to them, and I've heard them before, and they're the most precise, tight poems I know, you know. And I'd like to ask you about that, because the exact poem, the exact word, you know, they're a bit like that you mentioned dynamite in the last poem and the blowing up of 18 West 11th Street. I was thinking of the image of the ingredients of a bomb, you know, and when they're all put together and you set fire to it, it explodes. That's the impression I have on reading some of your poems. They explode inside of me. So they're dangerous in a way, and they're also talking about dangerous things and about unpleasant things, about our utopian democracy and so on. So tell us about
Someone
position.
did call this book dangerous, but at least my poems don't.
Right, right. But tell us about precision in poetry, because I mean, do you feel that the poem has to be such that it cannot be dismantled without causing an explosion? In other words, can you sort of leave in some language in there, sort of indeterminate for the reader? I hope my question is not too abstract. I just want to get us a conversation going about syntax, about choice, about economy.
Well, I think you're asking about ambiguity,
Yeah.
which sometimes I see doing because it's a deliberate tool, but sometimes if something I'm writing is too ambiguous, then I change it. I don't realize it at first. And I mean, while I'm doing my drafts and I show them to people, of course, we'll show our poems around and someone says, you know, someone misinterprets it.
Right.
Although even when I think I'm being very clear, sometimes it's clear I'm not clear, because I've noticed in reviews of not only this book, but various books that reviewers will sometimes misinterpret what I've written. So I don't know if that's, I have to assume that's my fault.
Well, as you know, I'm just one more question before I pass the mic to Sudeep, and you know, it's just to do with America, this country where this poem is set, this book is set, and the expectations one has about institutions, about the FBI, about government, and then sort of the sordid, you know, underbelly that you reveal through your story. So what conclusions are we to take from this about our perfectible democracy? Or maybe my
Well,
question is,
you and I have had this discussion because you are, I think, way more optimistic than I am. Although I did not write this with a view toward changing anything, because I'm unlike you, Indran. I'm not sure that words really do change anything. We had this discussion the other night in another venue, and I know you disagree with me, but I do have an obsession with power. I rarely write anything this explicitly political, and yet threaded through pretty much everything I've written is a consideration of various forms of power. So I'm a student of power without necessarily feeling that I'm going to change.
I'm glad I asked that question, because now I have this phrase, the student of power. I'm going to put that in your
Yes, you can put it in a
All right, go ahead.
Susana, thank you so much. It's a real
Thank
pleasure
you.
to hear you. Particularly the last poem I thought was, beautifully tight in this sort of 5-line quintet form, slightly different from the other ones you read. You're doing something that's kind of difficult in poetry, which is poetry as reportage. And not just poetry as reportage, but it's also very, very located in a very American specific context of a certain kind of violence, as you yourself say. A kind of violence you don't see necessarily in other parts of the world, because it's a very specific kind of violence. So what made you choose the poem as a form, as opposed to, say, prose poem or, say, short fiction for this?
I have been interested in COINTELPRO malfeasance for decades, and in my head for a long time I thought of it as a novel, but I'm not a novelist, so I have to work with the tools I have. And finally I figured out in my head a way that I could tell a story but not have a novel. I mean, some reviewers have referred to it as a novel in verse, and in a sense it is, but it's not. There are more. There is more unsaid in this book, I think, than in a more classical novel in verse.
No, it's actually wonderful, because Indran mentioned the community of poets, and I mean, Indran and I go back, 35 years at least. I remember his first book so clearly. I recently used it in a workshop again, The Elephants of Reckoning. That's how he started. That was his reckoning. And my God, in 35 years, he's done a lot, as have so many of you. And we meet each other in person, online. And this community, so a sense of community is terribly, terribly important. I think it's very important to re-emphasize that. And just the way we make friends through our words. So many times I'm introduced to new poetry. I go and explore that voice further. And then if I happen to meet that person and the person happens to be a nice person, it's brilliant. It doesn't have to be that way, but often they turn out to be really lovely people too. So it's a real treat and privilege. So thank you, Susana, for joining us today. And many, many congratulations with your new book. Now, a poet, a wonderful poet from London. She has a tripartite background. She's Bengali, like me, Indian as well, like me, but terribly, terribly English, because she is from London and probably is from there. And that's the place she identifies with. I've put her bio on the side. She is incredibly active in the poetry scene in London. Apart from being a really fine user of language, which is what attracts me to her work. So I'll read it out formally, because I think it's important to be partly formal. Jessica Mookherjee is a widely published poet. She has been twice highly commended in the Forward Prize for Best Single Poem, and her work is included in notable anthologies such as Staying Human, published by Blood Axe, She is the author of 2 full collections, Flood, which came out in 2018, and a second, Tigress, published by Nine Arches Press, was shortlisted for Best Second Collection in the Ledbury Month Prize. I was rooting for her volume, actually, but she's so generous. She on Facebook said, "I'm really glad the other poets won." Typical of her. Her latest pamphlet is Playlists, and she has her next full collection, and what a brilliant title, Notes from a Shipwreck, also forthcoming from Nine Arches Press in the August of this year. Notes from a Shipwreck explores themes of dislocation, migration, borders, and post-colonial identity. She's a co-editor of Against the Grain Press and a board member of the Poetry Society. Jess, a very, very warm welcome from all of us.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. And I feel like a new member to your collective, and it's lovely to meet everybody. I'll start reading a poem which often when I read in live in Britain, I have to sort of explain some of the terms, and I'm just noticing that actually you may probably know terms like Atman and Brahma, but actually, because I'm reading for American friends, I've got the word jumper in here, which is actually sweater, I think you call it. So it's actually like simple words sometimes can cross the globe here. Anyway, I'll start. This is a book from, this is a poem from Tigress, which is this book here, which Sudeep was alluding to. And this poem is Amrita, which is the nectar of the gods in Hindu culture. Amrita. There were gods in our cupboards, a family of cosmic giants, shrunk to fit in our airing cupboard. The vastness of Brahma's celestial omnipresence infused our sheets, our school uniforms, with the glory of Atman. She lit incense and fed him milk, said Bengali prayers under her breath. Krishna leapt from the piles of jumpers and folded towels to her delight. He closed the cupboard door and shut it tight, winked his god eye and skipped his musical way down the stairs into the kitchen, and she followed him, laughing, laughing. Kali the cutter had stolen out, tripped quietly behind them, tongue out, arms poised, ready to fight. Mother danced around the house with Krishna, oblivious, until she bumped into the black face of night, whose 1,000 eyes gripped her, 100 hands slapped her and whispered, "Where are your children?" Neighbours brought us fish and chips that night as the doctor's drugs turned the gods to ghosts, and Mother slept. She did not know that the gods did not look after us. Would it be okay if you could mute while I'm reading? Is that all right? Sorry, I don't know how it works, but thank you. This next poem, but thank you for that. It was nice to get to hear a little bit of applause. We missed that, I think, reading on Zoom. This next poem, I was very grateful for Sudeep to publish, actually, and it will also be in my next collection. And the title is Harpy. Harpy. Just before I opened my eyes, I knew how the marks on my sister's arse were made. My dream made it clear. This morning, I've a dreadful hankering for all the parts of a goddess, even her eggs. I will eat all of it. I am suddenly afraid my feathers will fly away, that I will not find any openings and my bones will snap. I enjoy regurgitation, dislike the precision of sound. Small noises make me want to tear necks. I fear for the children. Next door, now I'm an owl, free to despise, with no guilt or shame about that, which is what I loathe about humans. My only God is a feather, mostly skin. Some call it sky. I worship the accuracy that creates feathers. Storm swift, the world becomes red. Soon dark becomes fast, moans, hum, hum. I become hot in sharpness, an unheard pitch. I test these feathers, these vehicles, that soundless rip that swallow life's meaning, shrinks to the only living thing. Yeah. And my next poem is the title poem of my next book, Notes from a Shipwreck. And thank you again, Sudeep, for liking the title, because it's always a bit anxious about how it will be received. But just to sort of very quickly about the poem, I also work in public health, and as you know, that we've been through a big public health crisis. So there are a bit of veiled references to that, but also to Brexit and the sort of ship of fools analogy. Anyway, I'll read the poem. Notes from a Shipwreck. We go whaling in the violent blue, and the crew are lit by sperm oil, perfumed by ambergris. Our Nantucket night birds sing in a parliament of beer-filled chants. We wonder if the tales of monsters are real, details charted. We tie the stove up in red tape so it doesn't kill us. The captain asks me to cook Bengali fish and pray to the Hindu sea god Varuna, god of rain. Lightning strikes us. I thought he knew where we were going. Salus populi, he blusters in Latin. Says he thinks he's packed enough limes and lemons. I must stink wearing this foul plastic. Her fluke takes us down for the whole catastrophe of things we did to her in the sea. I was just a ship-trapped girl on a rock, far from homeland. It was nothing to do with me, just a bloody foreigner. I watch as they harpoon her. We wipe our sleeves while the wreckers look on, light fires on the shore. What a disaster the stink is for all the sailors left. Next comes scurvy. Next comes fever. The captain brings us a remedy, named after a baby whale who washed up on the banks of the Thames near Barnes Bridge last summer. I stood by when the crowds came to witness her carcass. And in my next book, Notes from a Shipwreck, there are a lot of allusions as well to the Tempest, because of things like storms and shipwrecks. Just sort of mentioning that really, because often in the Tempest, Miranda, who's Prospero's daughter, she tends to be a bit one-dimensional. So I wanted to give her a bit of life, and I wondered what it would be like to have come into her first womanhood on an island alone. So this poem here is called Flotsam. I'm changed into these rocks and I'm full of noises. A fox scream, badger scratch, twig snap. in symphony of flesh instruments, and I itch and hum until my ears sing. My voice is kelp as I wake. He calls me Miranda, says I'm his good, good girl. Says my mother used me like a doll, discarded, broken, and painted blue. I am unspoken, unseen, and untaken. If only I could sink a sea, rich and strange. Vases shake when I'm around, he says. He'll make me sleep, never let me cross wine-dark oceans, and yet I know I can make creams and potions. I read his books, learn to open clouds and caves where he hides the secrets. I can turn him into frog, newt, fish, and smear his pulped and pestled pages into my carved and fermenting skin. And my next poem, Sudeep was mentioning that I was from London. Well, I kind of am, but I was brought up in Wales, which has a very interesting relationship to England, actually. And as a child, my mother, because she was from Bengal, didn't really know the differences between Wales and England. So this is a kind of immigrant confusion as well. And also my father was both quite devout Hindu, but also not. And all these contradictions are coming out in this poem. This is called Outcast. I was no longer a Brahmin girl the day I left on that boat with my mother across the bay from Mumbles to Ilfracombe. I'd never seen the sea so hard like salt dunes. Are we in England now? I asked. We used the Severn Bridge after that. I thought it was the Howrah Bridge, where I was sick on my mother's lap. They took me to Bangladesh after the war. They say I must not cross the sea. Badmash, my father says, I'm no Brahmin girl. The day I stole his checkbook, no, even before, I took money to buy my sister's Christmas presents from the shops up the road, wrapped toys up in cheap tissue paper and ribbons, told them they were from Santa, rigged up bells and everything. They say I must not steal from a Brahmin. I was not a Brahmin girl. When I told all the Welsh kids at school that I was from India, not England, they were eased, having learnt the sins of the English from their fathers. But in my heart, I knew I was born in Luton. They say I must not bear false witness with respect to land. The Dharma Sutra says to become pure, I must fast for 3 days, only take a small portion of food. For 3 days, I must bathe at dawn, noon, and dusk. I must stand all day and sit at night. I have never done these things. I am unruly, always standing and sitting at the wrong times and eating crisps. The Dharma Sutra requires I do rituals for 3 years in order to return home. And this poem, also in my next collection, is about if a visitation from God. I'm quite interested in those kinds of things, but sometimes whatever God is might visit you in all sorts of different guises. In this case, he was David Bowie, but it could be anything, I suppose. When God visits me, he is covered in glitter, slippery, quiet in his mime costume, with little to tell me, pretends to cry at my sad fall downs, does the trapped in a box thing with his hands, pulls on an invisible rope, hangs his head, sometimes Prospero, sometimes Miranda, sometimes Ariel, can't always tell. If he tries to scare or soothe, as prayers are answered in cryptic clues and dance moves. Whimsical, he turns up as a woman, clothed in tropical fish, bowerbird or sharp-suited magpie, whatever the mood, tells me things in shrieks and spears a word or two my way, cut up from magazines. He did fall to earth in my dream once, dressed as a blue jay, and with a wide-brimmed hat, told me secrets, But I suspect, he tells everyone, says knowledge is the answer. And I know that's a trick to get me to keep listening. Just a couple of poems now before I finish. This one is called Whale Watching, returning to the Moby Dick theme from earlier. Whale watching. They say that there was a body, that his hands had turned to fins well before the last ice age. He had a heart the size of Scotland, and his tail fluke could smash the whole of the southeast coast to sand. His tongue washed up on the Thames one summer. I was taking a course on Renaissance painting at the National Gallery. They said I should go and find him, study his body for what it means. They said he had a wife, but he lost her long before the Old Testament was written. She was a tree, they said. I sailed around Glamorgan, Land's End, Portsmouth, survived all the shipping forecasts, news of losing identities at the 40s. They said, make him look magnificent, paint his eyes with whale fat, the stuff Turner used to paint sky. I never got to see him. They said he was stuffed full of plastic and petroleum. It's enough to worship art. The body of God is just a foolish allegory. I returned to the shore, took off my giant overalls and that were covered in his blood-red spume. And I'll finish with a poem called The Caller, also in my next collection. And, you know, in the tradition of poets writing about nightingales. The Caller. Saturday nights, dead dark time, just the shine of a curved backlight bounced off a metal can, sulks into the leftovers, the egg curry's last dregs. I have left turmeric stains and I mutter, do I care? A legend that I was once from India before the world was so broken and left scraps of me here in the kitchen. I throw the night door open, listening for him. Somewhere behind the fox call, there is laughter, a rattle, flycatcher over here. His tight trick and urgent call ticks from his guts. Come here, come here. Night singer. I didn't hear over the noises, the television, the cooker, next door's moans. I'm leaning from the window as he reaches quietly at first. And can I answer? Tell him I'm here at last, ready to duet into a blank and deadly future. There's a legend that nightingales sang for the Indian kings. Can I entice him with the smells of spice? I shed these fake leopard skin slippers and run into the garden, Ovid charmed, alarm called, sprout beak and shrink eye grow, lung song sharp, and he keeps calling, come, come, and my human hunger is marked for his words to sing our lonely songs. Kitchen window, forever in the dead of dark, flycatcher, rattler, all my island's voices call again, and my feathers appear for a moment as he sings, more urgent now, night jar, wind fallen in the cold dark. Come here, come here.
Woo! Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jess. I mean, this is extraordinary in terms of both tightness of language and also the sort of musical tonality that sort of skips beautifully through the, not just the Indian rhythms. What's very interesting for me to hear actually is, and this is the first time I'm hearing Jess read out aloud. I read her only in print, and so it's an added pleasure to see such, some of the poems are so located in this Indian/Bengali culture, but they are transformed for an international audience so effortlessly, without any italicization, without any notes. Well, clearly Tara Rugby decided to play a hymn from the gods. Maybe it was deliberately done, but it's really beautifully done. At the same time, your poems are also very, very dense and elusive. So there must be a lot of editing that goes on before you, present the poem the way it is, not just at the level of crafting, which you do, but also in terms of just the sheer volume of information that you actually out, but make it work for the poem. Am I close to that?
Yeah, I mean, I try. I think I'm trying to create a space which is foreign and allows people to enter into something foreign. And foreignness is never foreign to some people. And I'm trying to bring that space out. So, and also where things are misunderstood as well. So, what is the, what are certain books in Hinduism? What really are they? What's been passed down? I mean, my parents were from Bangladesh, but Hindus in Bangladesh is a very muted form of Hinduism, actually. So things may not be quite the same as they are for people in the rest of India. And also, I'm not from England. I wasn't brought up in England. I was brought up in Wales. But what is Wales? So I'm attempting to put into my poems this kind of multiplicity of cultures and sounds. So I'm just as influenced by Welsh writers as I am, say, by Indian writers and also English writers. I mean, I went to school, the same school that Dylan Thomas went to school. So, I was, so there's many things, I suppose, that seep in quality that I'm attempting to show. I hope I achieve it.
Fascinating, Jessica, and to learn that you went to the same school as Dylan Thomas. My God, and jumpers, crisps, all these English words come back to me. I used to wear jumpers and eat crisps in London, but beyond that, you have a kind of almost, forgive my association, please just denounce it if you wish, but almost sort of a Jack the Ripper kind of, violent, Ted Hughes, sort of Hughesian, sort of Crow-like diction, which is gripping. I mean, I don't know if that's the right word, gripping, enthralling. I'm just completely sort of seized by it, and it makes me think about diction, the choice, the register with which the words you choose to write your poems, because it's both elevated apart. I mean, it's poetic in a sense as opposed to ordinary speech, and yet it's incredibly almost alarmingly or ordinary. I think of the banality of evil. I don't know. It's interesting to hear your work after hearing Susana's as well, because of the there's a sort of I mean, I am alarmed, but in a pleasant way. I mean, I want to. I can go back. I'm looking forward to reading your work in depth. So I hope. So thank you. My question is really just praise. It's praise for your work, and if I have to ask a question, perhaps I'll say I'll ask you. I'm fascinated by how you do this. You bring in your multiple teachers into your words, and I'm curious what you said about a muted Hinduism, because I am a minority, a Tamil in the world, in a sense, a Tamil from Ceylon, a country that no longer exists. How does that muted Hinduism? How can Hinduism faith, in a sense, culture? I'm curious to know if you want to discuss that, please go ahead.
I can try. I'm no expert, I must say, but my cousins live in the States. So grew up in New Jersey. My cousins are living in North Carolina and Missouri. Very Hindu, So they had, but my father says that actually we never celebrated Holi. That wasn't a thing. There are many things about the culture that I don't know. My father's a scientist, so he is pretty much also an atheist as well as promoting certain aspects of Hinduism, which suit him actually, which I think is a characteristic of everyone, all religions actually. You take the bits that suit you. My mother had a kind of serious mental illness, which is alluded to in the first poem. So the use of gods and religions has a different tenor there as well. So I suppose we take from all, so you say muted. Well, I think if you're writing at a time now where there's quite a huge degree of misinterpretation and fundamentalism, both say in America with Christianity and in India with Hinduism, I think it's really, the word muted is quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because what is the real? You know, who's to say which one is right? I suppose my parents grew up with a majority Muslim community. So they simply took what they could and practiced in the way that they did. And I think in terms of poetry, it just comes out the way it comes out for the poem. And
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just grateful that you could see the links between my poetry and Ted Hughes. I mean, that's a huge thing to say, and thank you very much for that. But one of the things I took from Ted Hughes is he said, just imagine what it's like to be a tree and then write from the tree's perspective. It's kind of as simple as that. So if I'm writing about a harpy, I mean, what is that? You know, who is that? And I think there's something that just appears from the violence of what that creature may well be, and then will present itself. So I think there's something about art that can do that.
Thank you.
You know, if I may, the word muted Hinduism is interesting for me to hear because I lived in Bangladesh for 5 years. And in fact, there's a friend and colleague from Bangladesh, a poet and academic who's online right now, listening to you. And as a Hindu, ostensibly a Hindu, I mean, I necessarily didn't have to adhere to any one religion. But it is a muted kind of Hinduism because if you show your Hinduism in a completely all Muslim country, then it's not taken very, very well. Just as the other thing, the right-wing situation in my country has happened horribly. So there's that. But it's a kind of mutedness, which I think both Susana and your poetry, and you can't not see the link because it's that anti-mute subversion that is taking place. Because there's so much violence, through poetry, we're trying to kind of, not only as an emollient, but we are trying to give the message as calmly and as quietly as possible. But thank you both. I mean, they were tremendous, really. We can go on and on talking about these things. And that's one of the things about this, this setup we have,
Right.
There's a lot of time for conversation, except that Dawn has to leave early. So we are very aware of the time. Thank you, Jess, and thank you, Susana, again. And next we have Tim Tomlinson from New York. Tim, it's a delight to have you. So good to see you and Edel, in fact. The last time I met the two of them, you had invited me to do a reading in the Red Room, was it? Or the KGB bar? Is that what it was?
That's correct, the Red Room.
Yes, the Red Room, which had this grand piano there. And, it's quite spectacular. It's almost like this, postmodern red-lipped couch. Or was the bar all red? I forget. But yes, Tim, it's a delight to have you. Your bio is on the chat, but I will read it out formally. Tim Tomlinson is the author of the chapbook Yolanda, an Oral History in Verse, the poetry collection Requiem for the Tree Fort I Set on Fire, and a collection of short fiction, This Is Not Happening to You. Recent work appears in Big City Lit, Columbia Journal, Home Planet News, The Archer, and Poet Sounds, an anthology inspired by Beach Boys, Pet Sounds. He is a co-founder and director of a wonderfully resonant and really super active New York writers workshop. And I'm really jealous because he carries this workshop to all sorts of places, including next stop is Greece, I believe, which I would love to teach at, or all of us would love to teach at. We are planning one in Delhi and India as well. And he's a co-author of a craft book called The Portable MFA in Creative Writing. Great title, I think. And currently in use on 4 continents. He teaches various forms of writing in NYU's Global Liberal Studies, and his website is there for you to see, timtomlinson.org. Tim, a very, very warm welcome to you, and Deedle as well, your spouse who dedicatedly comes to all your readings.
Thank you, Sudeep, for the warm welcome. I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Indran, for including me. And so great to be reading with this esteemed company. I've really enjoyed Susana's work and Jessica's. I'm looking forward to the final reader's work, my Brooklyn mate. I'm going to read some prose. I've been working on building a collection of short fiction called Parentheticals. Parentheticals refers to characters who are not part of or don't feel as if they're part of the grand narrative of New York City. There are some recurring characters, and I'm just going to get right into it. This is Parentheticals 2, which was recently published, I think, in Big City Lit. I'll be reading a slightly revised, slightly abridged version. So Parentheticals 2, it's a diptych, it's in 2 parts. The first part is called The 2 Girls. There were 2 girls at the end of the block I grew up on. One had strawberry blonde hair, a pixie cut with bangs, and freckles. I don't remember her name. I don't remember much of anything we did ever, but we did a lot. Or more accurately, we didn't do very much, but the little that we did often, and for endless stretches of time. She had swings in her backyard, a sandbox. Sometimes we went to her room. We dropped the blinds against the sun and sat quietly on a chair with coarse upholstery. I wondered why anyone would have a chair with coarse upholstery, but I didn't mind the way it made my thighs itch as long as she were there. Next door, a woman with 7 kids and no husband spent all day shouting from behind a screen door. Once, when her cat had kittens, my friend with the bangs and the freckles stole a black one and gave it to me. I had that black cat for many years, long after my friend had moved away. When she moved away, to where I have no idea, it was as if she disappeared, she became for me the ideal girl. I can't speak for her, but I can say from my perspective, I never felt more complete than when we were together. And after she left, I went around for months with a hollow feeling in my chest. Years later, when I was fucking a girl I'd met in AA, one I had flirted with after weeks of meetings, I looked into her face, the freckles, the hair, and I gasped. "What's wrong?" the AA girl said, and I told the AA girl about the ideal girl. "You're a dead ringer for her," I said. "You might even be, in fact, you probably are the ideal girl. Don't you remember the chair with the itchy upholstery? Don't you remember the black cat?" The AA girl said she had no memory of me or any of those things. And I said, maybe you just repressed it. That's possible, even likely, I said, because, for example, I never forgot your face, your hair, your freckles, and the feeling of total completeness whenever we were together. But even with all that, I can't remember your name, like at all. You could be Alice, you could be Zoe. She said she was neither, but she knew what I was, crazy. And I was, but I wasn't. The other girl lived around the corner, close to the silent highway. From the first grade, this girl was in my classes until one day she wasn't. She had long wavy hair and a habit of bringing her chin to her chest and looking up at you through the fringe. It was fetching. In fifth grade, she started to become absent. At the start of sixth, they told us she had died of something called leukemia. She became the girl no one remembers. Then the girl who used to live where the Chinese family lives. But for me, she became the girl who died. Years later, when I was fucking a girl I'd met in Sex Addicts Anonymous, I said, you look just like the girl who died. Looking up through her bangs, she said, I am the girl who died. I told her she was predictable. She said, duh, I'm an addict. And she was, so was I. I had habits. One was I'd recreate girls I'd lost in current girls. You see too many movies, the girl from Sex Addicts Anonymous told me, or you see the same two movies too many times. Both were true. I was obsessed with Brian De Palma's Obsession. And then, because of Obsession, the Hitchcock movie that inspired it, Vertigo. I preferred Jimmy Stewart in the Hitchcock over Cliff Robertson in the De Palma. And I hoped I was more like him, intense, crazed even, shaking the girl by the shoulders to persuade her of the urgency of my feelings, and not some bland vanilla dope to whom odd things happened. But I preferred Geneviève Bujold in the De Palma over Kim Novak in the Hitchcock. Novak reminded me of the girls I grew up with the exception of the ideal girl, overstuffed, underread, and no home behind the eyeballs. Whereas Bujold was the kind of woman I hoped for, foreign and cultured, with vast depths churning beneath the obsidian surfaces of her eyes. What disappointment I remember experiencing when I learned that she wasn't French, but Canadian. The AA girl turned out to be partially correct. I was not crazy, but she was not the ideal girl. No partner ever is, she told me. She said, look at Godard and Anna Karina. I said, what about them? Godard, she explained, invented what Karina had to pretend to be. It's amazing she didn't wind up killing herself. I said, Godard enabled her to become Anna Karina. And that, the AA girl said, is when he left her. See, no partner is ever ideal. But the AA girl's failure to become the ideal girl, that wasn't why we split up. We split up because she lived in an SRO near Riverside Drive. Her studio shared a bathroom with 4 other studios. One of the lodgers was a waiter who skated home after work at 3 a.m. on rollerblades that he didn't bother to remove rolling past our door. Plus, he whistled. Another lodger brushed his teeth each night for 45 minutes. He timed it with an alarm clock set on the edge of the sink. Even if you had to piss, you couldn't throw him out of the bathroom. He was a boxer. He brushed his teeth in a wife beater. His biceps contained intimidating tattoos. So the AA girl never became the ideal girl, but in many ways she was ideal. That's why several years after we split, I was so upset to learn she'd passed. She'd always complained about New York City. She needed elbow room, space for projects. She took a position managing property upstate where she cared for horses and engaged with other farm-like projects, one of which was rewiring a barn. That's the one that killed her. She was not a trained electrician. After receiving a sizable jolt of direct current, she plunged from a ladder and broke her neck. It could not be determined, nor did it matter, which one killed her, the fall or the electricity. And it wasn't the cause of her death, but its fact that caused that hollow feeling in my chest to return. I thought of getting myself another cat, a black one like the one the ideal girl had stolen and given to me. Then I wondered, was it the black cat all along that had caused the ideal girl to disappear and the AA girl to become the girl who died, number 2? Part 2, the Chinese family. Several months after the girl who died, her family moved away and the Chinese family moved in. The Chinese family had 3 children, a boy, the eldest, who became the brother of the Chinese girl, and 2 girls. The older of those girls was the Chinese girl. She joined my class. She replaced the girl who died, even sat at the girl who died's desk. The younger sister became the sister of the Chinese girl. Before the Chinese family, none of us knew any Chinese people, except for the skinny waiters at the Port China restaurant. They wore yellow vests and white shirts and delivered silver platters of pork fried rice and egg foo young, or porcelain bowls holding scoops of green ice cream stuck with fortune cookies that told your future based on your past. Your kind nature will lead to riches, or today's sacrifice is tomorrow's reward. Compared to us, the Chinese girl was smart. She did algebra, French, her spelling was perfect, but she was not pretty. The sister of the Chinese girl in the class behind, she was not smart, but she was pretty, way pretty. I can still see her pretty face, the black bangs, the narrow eyes, always smiling. In winter, her coat had a hood trimmed with fur, and for me, her pretty face inside that hood changed her instantly from the sister of the Chinese girl to, more simply, the pretty girl. She became the pretty girl for many of the other boys too, but when we spoke of her, we continued to refer to her as the sister of the Chinese girl. We weren't sure if Chinese girls could be considered pretty in the normal way, the American way, even when they were devastatingly pretty, as the sister of the Chinese girl was, much prettier than the girls in our school, some of whom were pretty, some of whom I fancied, but none anywhere near as much as the pretty girl, who, I found, remained on my mind after school when I played football, or sat in detention, or walked home in the dark, passing close to her home, sometimes going out of my way to pass directly in front of her home and linger near the mailbox at the end of her driveway. On the late afternoons when I detour past the home of the Chinese family, I wondered what I would say if the Chinese girl, or even if the pretty girl, noticed me and asked, why was I walking home in a way so much longer than the direct way? If it was the Chinese girl asking in this scenario, I would say, it's a free country, or something equally snotty, which was the way I'd respond to any girl. But if it was the pretty girl asking, I found that I couldn't think of any remark, or I could think of one, but then immediately I'd think, no, that won't work, and I'd think of something else equally inadequate. When it came to the pretty girl, I realized I had no words, which was terrifying, but still I'd pass by her house and hope that she might come to her fence and say something, and that whatever she said might trigger in me the ability to express all the words that I knew were in me, all the words that I felt and believed, all of which coursed through me as feelings, not words. Back home, I wondered how I might get to know the pretty girl. The Chinese family seemed so serious. They didn't play with other kids. They attended school. They went home, presumably to do homework. They never talked about TV. They showed no interest in sports except in gym, where, I apologize. I think I've botched my, well, I'm just going to jump forward about a paragraph and get to a point where the narrator is walking through school halls after detention. And I'll pick it up near the water fountain, near the music room. I heard something hypnotic. I followed the hypnotic sound, and there, seated at an upright piano against a wall, was the pretty girl. her fingers moving nimbly across the black and white keys. The sound she produced, I had never heard anything more beautiful, more bedazzling. I remember being amazed that a girl, a fifth grade girl, a Chinese girl, could make a sound that beautiful. Sometime later, I learned that it was Bach she played, an English suite. I pictured the notes falling through the air like snow, a whirlwind of notes that caught me up and spun me in a swoon. And in that swoon, I knocked over a music stand and startled the pretty girl. She looked at me and smiled, then turned the sheet music back to the beginning and started again. Years later, I was driving in a blizzard on LSD. Snow rushed the windshield from infinite angles, then scattered, then returned, and that whirlwind brought back the sound of the Bach, its notes dancing on transparent music paper, superimposed on the pretty girl's face, and I understood with piercing acid sadness that in my life, beauty of that magnitude, both the music and her smile, would never be more than hallucinations. But in sixth grade, I didn't know that. So I developed a strategy for getting to know the pretty girl. I teased the Chinese girl. I teased her in a fun way, I thought, in the hope that she might say, "Oh, you're so funny, you should meet my sister." I teased her in class and out. I said every stupid thing I could think of or that I'd heard about Chinese people. I pulled my eyes into a slant. I stuck my upper teeth over my lower lip. I asked her if she ate dog. None of it worked. And the next time I heard the pretty girl playing piano, the brother of the Chinese girl stepped between us. He folded his arms and glowered. The way he glowered became, for me, the posture of righteousness. He believed in a cause. His cause was, keep away from my sister. His look was, you are vermin that I could and should stomp dead. I'd seen that look before. I'd see it a lot more in the coming years from cops and teachers and my father. I came to agree with it. That didn't make me feel better. Thank you very much.
My goodness, this was like a thriller. Intense, intense, intense. Really well modulated and really well paced. And I have to say, rarely does fiction have that kind of short fiction have that kind of impact. The politically incorrect jokes, I thought it was so funny, Yeah. I said, should I be laughing? But it's funny, Clearly, it's a very kind of New York, Woody Allen-ish kind of humor. Do you want to talk about humor? Because I think generally speaking, poets especially, I don't know, and even writers find writing humor in a serious, devilish way quite difficult. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, well, that's interesting. I love the Woody Allen comparison, but of course that puts me in company that's verboten these days. The humor in this story, I think, just emerges out of the way people interact, or at least the way I interacted with people. It's not really shoehorned in there for laughs. It's part of a fabric that's a larger realism of a sort. And it's interesting that the politically incorrect component factors, it's certainly not deliberate. And I'm always surprised that people find some of the material I present either offensive or questionable. This story in particular went around to so many different places. I don't know if I'd ever received more rejections, but I just kept going at it, thinking, well, some editor is going to click with it. Although I heard back from readers at various places that the story was both misogynist and racist, and that there was no boundary between narrator and author, all of which made me think, well, I have to keep going with this one because it's touching nerves.
Very much touching nerves, wonderfully touching nerves, and wonderfully, the humor it breaks out of you like a boil or something. It bursts. You can't help it. Very well done. Artful. So where is it being published?
It's
I
just
think
been published on PWSI live.
and I think it's in a Big City Lit.
Oh, Big City Lit. Okay, great. Looks like that.
Yeah.
Marvelous.
Lovely.
Marvelous.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. And,
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
I saw you edited a few choice words in the new draft, but that's all right. And I was just wondering what Dee had to say about all these characters in this. We will have another discussion much later, the three of us.
Okay, great.
Thank you. And finally, we have Joanna, and Joanna will be introduced by my friend Indran.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to invite Joanna Solfrian. Joanna Solfrian's first book, Visible Heavens, was chosen by one of my most favorite poets, Naomi Apr9, for the 2009 Wick Prize, which was a national first book award. So she started strong, and she's just getting stronger and stronger. Her second book, The Mud Room, was published by Madhead Press, followed by the chapbook, The Second Perfect Number, published by Finishing Line Press. Her poems have appeared widely in journals throughout the world, including the Harvard Review, Boulevard, Rattle, Margie, the Southern Review, Salamander, Pleiades, Image, and also in the internationally touring art exhibit Speak Peace, American Voices, Respond to Vietnamese Children's Paintings. She's a MacDowell Fellow, a colleague in that sense as well, and a five-time Pushcart nominee. She lives and works in Brooklyn and New York City. You can find her work or references to her work at joannasolfrian.com. One of my favorite poets, delighted to welcome you to this stage. Go ahead, Joanna.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for having me. And I'll keep the chatting brief because I know it's sometimes the fourth reader, you just, if you're a little tired, it's okay.
No, take your time. Wonderful.
Yeah. No, but thank you for having me. And it was lovely to listen to the other three. I have so many notes. I take notes when I read. I don't know if anybody else does, but I have so many notes that maybe we can follow up with after the fact if we find each other on social media or whatnot. So
we will send an email introducing all four of you. So please,
that'd be great.
Well, part of it is to just build a community. Yes,
of course.
We'll do that.
So I'll read from the latter two that Indran mentioned, The Second Perfect Number and The Mudroom. I do have another manuscript that I'm working on that hopefully will come out in the next couple of years, but they take a while, as you all know. So I'll just start here. It is true, I wish to be an ecstatic. I have sisters in the church. When they sing, they are immortal. I know in what a flawed way they bend their knees, and God moves through them when they are still, like pines. My own God is a whisper. When I wake in my dark city and bend to tie my shoes, I extend an ear to the dark roots. Sometimes I hear. I think someone is not muted. I hear some background noise, but I don't know if that's something we can address. But the chapbook, The Second Perfect Number, works as a journal. It was from a poem a day project that I did a couple Februaries ago. I do this every February with several poets. And if you're into math, maybe you can figure out why it's called The Second Perfect Number. So far, only one person has. Maybe I love math. And maybe not everybody else does, but I do love math. And so it was a poem a day project, and they are sort of related to the ghazal form, which is my favorite form to work in. I enjoy as a female, I discovered that it feels particularly female to me anyway. I discovered that in my earliest poems, Grammatically speaking, I would often use a lot of introductory clauses and would, as a means of leading the reader into the experience in a way that to me felt that I was demurring and being a bit too careful. I think if I, as a feminist, study my grammatical patterns, I can learn a lot about the ways in which just the ways in which I might not be bold enough or brave enough. And that was something that I studied in my late 20s. And the form of the ghazal, which, as you know, are couplets that are somewhat isolated. They work together, but they're somewhat isolated and can stand on their own. To me was appealing because I did not need to do that sort of explaining. So I'll read some of those. Van Voorhees Park. Today was a difficult day to be human. After misunderstood words, I saw the high dangling chestnut burrs and longed for their view. The best days are the days I lose my reason. Courting the lunatic, I pour another glass. I woke this morning yanked from a dream. Who cares? I'm most interested in the yanking. Letters keep arriving in pastels. We're sorry for your loss, the winner, easily beating out, we loved him. Every child understands the omnipresence of love. When my child was one, I love you was just, you. Breakfast. My children do not want to know their origin. I protest. Let me tell you, there's an egg, a very tiny one, and something called sperm, which is, we know, Ma, you told us already. They mix and a baby starts growing. But there's more. The younger one rolls her eyes. The older slides her cereal bowl to the other end of the table. There's clay and a hand of God. There are specks of stardust, a flame, and a wheel. You can't see them, but you can feel them in your belly. There's a scar from your own mother, a tiny circle from the tether that held you to her, and it opens. Do you remember? They are chomping their Rice Krispies and do not hear. But when I kiss their heads, their skull plates move, and they look up and press my cheek, damp with tears. This is sort of a fable prose poem. Guest. Once near a sea there lived a wind. The wind fell in love with the sea and its constant graces, the way it slept and heaved and reflected, the way fishes and moonlight swam in its generous graves. The wind wanted to share with the sea some of its own delights, small towns and their steeple bells, the skirts of lovely women, and of course, the roads of the black whale who leapt to say hello. So the wind swept up armfuls of droplets and carried them to the small towns, where some atomized over the bells or evaporated at the sight of the beautiful women. Then the wind carried the remaining droplets back to the sea to greet the whales. But each time they returned, the remaining droplets huddled and fell. The wind grieved and repeated its attempts to clutch the sea until the sky was filled with clouds. And in this way, the woman in the boat scattering ashes could not tell which were tears and which were rain. I do very much like staring at objects. I know Jessica mentioned sometimes, just looking at the tree I think you were talking about. I enjoy looking at objects and imagining their inner lives. And of course, Pablo Neruda wrote a lot of odes to ordinary things. And I also like to research. So when I write about objects, it's also a way for me to learn about their origin and who made them and who cut them out of rock and where they came from. So this is Ode to Salt. In you live prisms, the hidden spectra of the great gray Pacific, infinitesimal cliffs that cleave to the jogger's breasts. You are at once clear and opaque, like the heavily muscled old boyfriend. Your jagged kingdoms on a loaf of bread cure the yeast of its bloated desire and facilitate an earthen crust that protests the knife. When I slice your playground, I sacrifice my thumb so that the tears of my body can mate with the tears of your tide. When you scatter, I wet my opposable God, and in my mouth, millennia dissolve. On my tongue, you howl for your evaporated Eden, your mud mother's fecund warmth. Your sting is the ocean's rebuke for my crawling out of it. Indeed, it is possible your mute tectonic heaves are wiser than the ocean's lusty spindrift. But I prefer those cubic souvenirs from the grit of simple work on my skin, so that in the hotel room when I arrive, damp and lycra, panting, there is something of your blessed infinity to kiss.
Marvelous, marvelous, really good.
Oh, thank you. This is on rereading Christian Wyman's My Bright Abyss. I love this book so much. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. I've read it several times, and it's like, you know, after some point you can't dog ear every single page. So this is a conversation with this, an idea in this book. There were a couple typos in this poem when I sent it to you all, so I'll just read it properly. On rereading Christian Wyman's My Bright Abyss. Saturday, sleepovers, birthday party, paper-plated pizza slices, the moronic sorority of mothers in a clutch. I judge too much, lob pyrotechnics from my brain, then self-flagellate with the nearest pool noodle. I don't want heaven to be elsewhere, all healing. I want to die into life, so that I can repair my relationship with paper plates. Quantum weirdness. The unobserved particle goes through multiple screen holes, but the observed only one. What I observe of mothers, parties, the cat now grooming its anus is altered by my means of perception. This feels like bad news. All religion is an attempt to comprehend the numinous. Careful, Joe, as your pen drains, so does the divine. Pop's Independence Day. This is another one of those poem a day journal puzzles, sort of. And it does have like a fill in the blank line in it, so I'll just do that for the blank. Pop's Independence Day. I remember you in your final atonement, how calm you were. Though you couldn't tell me, you understood the names hidden in the dusk. I wish I could have given you my arms so that you'd have recognized a tether to earth, but in your stupor, you needed to forget things. I wonder sometimes about the work of your eyes. What did they see in the ceiling that made the nurse clutch her breast? You felt no injury over the climateless beeps and drips. I do the crossword by your side. Per aspera ad. Then out the plate glass, mute, fireworks. And for 2, maybe 3 seconds, they drape the sky with jewels. As a human, you were nearly blameless. You wouldn't let go of the bouquet I picked from the courtyard until it was time to let go. The moon has come to my window, so I practice gratitude. I grew up in the Protestant church. My father was a Protestant minister, and much of my work is trying to apprehend and live in a way that is religiously acceptable to me. I learned to wash the feet of the prostitutes and to love thy neighbor, and am very disturbed when people use religion to justify all sorts of horrors. So most of the poems are about trying to find a spiritual practice that that I find acceptable. The moon has come to my window, so I practice gratitude. I am grateful for the small children, their clamor as they run down the dirt road, the penumbras around them, their bright braids and weeping knees. Invisible inside them is a mirror for angels, so that the temporarily holy can recognize themselves. Their brows are a grave where ideas rest. The mothers kiss them there, as I just did, bedside, and the ideas move. In this way, we are all free. Okay, just one more. I think I'm good on time, just one more. It's called Desire. When every cup is filled with wine, we lose the capacity for desire. The first gasp after the womb, the mouth to mouth of God's desire. Defenestrate the cups. Come to the garden at night. Don't be demure, the grass is already naked. Desire, notes that float from the guitar to the infant's throat. She wails them back, black with desire. Forget the dog, the groceries. He can defecate in the yard. You can subsist on desire. Thank you.
Marvelous, marvelous. Joanna, I just want to say thank you. The moon has come to my window listening to your poems. So I too will practice gratitude, but I want to ask you about practice, because you write also. I think every day, at least, and you write in spurts, and you write these guzzles, and you're searching for God. You talked about God, or understand, or the sort of that acceptable way of praying and finding. So, can you talk about poetic practice, spiritual practice, the relationship between the two, and does the poem in the end save you, save the reader? Meditate on that, and I realize it's a big open question, comment. Thanks.
As for practice, I mean, I just think the matter of attending is spiritual in nature. And so I do write most every day. Part of that is just because, you know, mathematically, I'll probably get more keepers if I write every day.
Right.
So very unglamorous part of the answer. But I do, you know, it is for me, and of course, everybody has their own practice. For me, it's a sign of respect for the people who have written before. And often what I do on a daily basis is copy out, you know, I have, you know, sort of a commonplace book. I copy out other people's poems and you know, just not so much explicate them, but just look at what they're doing and how they're doing it and my feelings to it. So I really just think, you know, writing for me is a way to admit my lack of omniscience. I'm often trying to let go of things when I write, and that to me also does dovetail with a spiritual practice of just trying to be in the world in a way that says, I don't know. I don't know what it is like for other people in other, you know, sort of boxes than I am in. And so paying attention to things and listening and just trying to be present in the world is something that I do when I write every day, even if I throw it away. And I'm really, honestly, most of the time I throw it away. But it also does strike me as a spiritual practice as well.
Thank you.
Joanna, there's lots of things I thought. I mean, I take notes down as you do too. My notebook on the side is filled this evening as well. I want to particularly ask you about the ghazal form. The ghazals you read, and I saw it on the chat. Of course, the chat box being narrow, the couplets were being crushed together, but I understand how they would look on the page, is a very different kind of ghazal form than, say, the ghazal I am aware of, which originated in my part of the world, or certainly in the Persian, Arabic, Hindu world. In fact, it was an Indian poet, old friend of mine who is no more, Agha Shahid Ali, who popularized the ghazal form in America, and it was then called the American ghazal. Because I was almost waiting at the end, because at the end, what the Radif, the last couplet, you invoke the poet's name. It's almost egotistical, except that it's not, because you're, in a sense, you'll understand this because of your Christian background. It's talking about the divine. It's not you so much as the divine voice. But I don't see that in the ghazals you're writing. So tell me about why you call them ghazals, for one, apart from the sort of obvious reason.
Yeah, I hope I said ghazal-ish. I mean, they I certainly want to be careful that I'm not one of those people who's like, oh yeah, just wildly appropriating. I do have some that have the traditional radif and have the rhyme right before the repeated word. I just didn't read any today. It's just, for me, the sensibility of the discrete couplets that, and it was Ali who referred to them as pearls on a strand in his Ravishing Disunities, which is that book that was so well known here. And that is the sensibility that to me feels particularly ghazal-like. So some of them don't have some of those more audially recognizable elements, like the repeated, the radif, the repeated refrain. I do use self-address a lot in the last couplet. I love that, that move to, we're dialoguing with ourselves when we write as well. So that move to just be like, hey, for me, more often than not, it's a way to sort of call myself out on some sort of pretension that I've written above.
Yeah, and the couplet form, in fact, in this particular form helps that, because it's the sort of yin-yang situation, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's why the use of the couplet, because of the other and the now and so on. I mean, books have been written about the ghazal. It's just such a fascinating form that we don't use it so much. Well, we do in our part of the world, but it's done in Urdu and Hindustani, which is where the ghazal works. And ghazals are, in fact, more often than not sung out aloud, as opposed to written for the page. So it's interesting that I also like the oral quality you have in your poetry. There is the sort of singing out from the choir pit, so to speak, which is very beautiful. But thank you. I mean, it's just been such a treat, all four of you. Just such fine, high quality writing, completely different registers, all marrying together as one unified song. And that's really what's really, I mean, I can say Dawn and Indran and I are always blessed, because you guys open beautiful doors for us. So we are grateful, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and all of the poets and writers today. Jesse mentioned the hymns. That's what you were writing and presenting to us this morning. So I do not need to go to the service tomorrow. The service has come to me today.
Yes, in forms of, in so many, everybody used the words God in one way or the other. God and anti-God was completely present in everybody's work. metaphorically and otherwise.
And
This recording is going to be available very soon on both Indran and my YouTube channels. So you will be able to share it. Dawn is very, very good. He's going to ping me at 2 p.m. saying the recording has been sent, download it because I don't have enough space on my computer.
and thank you again to all, and Don, for your
Don,
Jesse.
as
I know
always.
he has to run, so we'll have to close
Yes.
up the morning. We'll be in touch very soon, and looking forward to reading your poems, and send them to Beltway Poetry Quarterly when you have time, and the magazine I edit with 2 other poets. And Sarah and Renee. Thanks so much, everyone. Susana, Tim,
See you all. Good night
Joanna,
from India. It's 10, almost 10:30. And we'll see you next month, same time, second Saturday.
second Saturday. Take care. Jesse, thanks.